Hello, nice to see you. Welcome. Um, uh, we, oh, this meeting's being recorded. So, Justin and I are in a wee house in Glen Lyon, and it is possible that our internet will be patchy. It's been okay so far. So, yeah, just to let you know. So this session is on deliberation and sense making. I think we called it. Though we may have changed the name. It goes again, we've had to split up things that shouldn't necessarily be split up, just to have the time, and also
Oh, looks like Eva's dropped off. Someone's back now. Hi, Eva.
okay. There we go. That was quick. We've decided we'll go on the same computer, which may help us be slightly more reliable. Can you hear me? Because I'm
Yeah,
not seeing any pictures at the moment. You
I
can.
can hear
Great.
you. Yeah, I don't know if everyone else can, but it sounds better now the video is off.
Okay. Okay. Well, we'll do our best. Yeah, so let's just take our customary minute or two just to arrive in the session and move into our own spaces, move into your own space. Maybe that means moving away from the screen a little bit. It might mean closing your eyes or just looking at something you like looking at. And using your breath to come into your body. And maybe noticing where you're feeling tense, where you're feeling stiff, where you might want to move to loosen up a little bit. Maybe also just feeling the weight of your body as you start to kind of arrive in your own space. Feeling the weight of your body on your bum, maybe on your feet, anything else that's holding you up. Just feeling that solidity and that connection with the earth and with your environment. And taking a moment just to acknowledge where you are in your day, how you're feeling, what you might want to acknowledge and put to one side so that you can really be here in the session. And maybe giving one or more big deep breaths. And when you're ready, coming back in connection with the screen, the other people who are here, and with the fact that you're in a session about assemblies. So welcome back. I hope that was helpful. And we're Justin and I are going to pass this computer between us. So okay. Oh yeah, where are you going to groups for breakouts? I forgot. I always forget the breakouts. Okay, we thought we might make it slightly shorter. Have groups of threes and give you 10 minutes. So that's still about 3 minutes each. And if you want to open those when you're ready, Johanna. Looks of edges.
Okay, great. Welcome back. We're staying off video so that we hopefully don't vanish entirely. So sorry about that. It's a, but Joanna, can you maybe put up the first slide? So this session is looking at deliberation, at deepening through dialogue, and kind of drawing a contrast between confrontational communication and dialogue communication. And so just with that slide, remember last week when I was in a different continent, we were looking at inputs, new information coming in, different perspectives, what needs to be brought into an assembly related to the pathways out of it, and accessible but not dumbed down information. And then this week we're looking at deliberation, shared listening, speaking, rethinking, be able to change our minds, change our point of view. And then next week we'll be looking at convergence, integration, how we bring conversations together, how we focus on what we're enthusiastic about in terms of going forward, and then looking at making decisions, agreements, setting next steps, mapping out what needs to happen next, using the pathways out, and also in particular identifying contentious areas. What do we need to clarify to shift those contentious areas? What do we need to adapt, or what do we need to let go of in those? So, but today's focused on deliberation. So we just jump to the next slide. Let's make that bigger.
Is it full screen, Justin?
Sorry, Joanna, can you go to the next slide? Is that, or is it my screen's frozen?
It's now on what is the assembly about?
Great, thank you. So yeah, so if we've agreed on what we want to do, then it's about strategy, about working out how we move forward. If we all want to do different things as we engage within the Portobello assembly, then it's distributed assemblies, different conversations happening in different places. It's open space. And if we disagree, or if we're not yet clear about what we want to do, then it's about deliberation and dialogue, which is what we're going to look at here. Sorry, Barbara, you raised a hand?
Yeah, sorry, we're still seeing the deliberation deepening through dialogue slide. Is that what we should be seeing? And it's not full screen, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's what I'm seeing too. Joanna, is that possible? Maybe it's bigger.
You want this?
Let's try and make it stop sharing and reshare.
You don't need those notes. Okay.
How's that?
That's brilliant. I think.
Could you show it as a slide rather than the smaller version?
This is full screen for me.
No, it's not. It's small for us. So just need to click the slideshow bit. Technology is really playing games. Okay. I'm sure this never happens to anybody else, just for us. Nobody ever has an issue with their laptops.
Happens to me all the time.
Yeah.
Constantly.
Okay. Yeah.
It says it's paused.
Okay, well,
Can I try it on this computer? Just one more time on yours. Let's see. No, it's not doing it. I can see that you're pressing it.
Hmm.
Let me try on mine. Are you seeing that?
I can see your screen.
Oh, yeah.
Which one is it? Where are we?
No.
Number 24,
29, 30.
30.
Yeah. Is that, whoa. Ladies and gentlemen. Okay. So what we're focusing on here is the third part, not where we agree or we want to do different things, but where we disagree or we're not yet clear on what we want to do. So, for example, if we've brought a question to the assembly, then it's a question that we want to be able to deliberate on, decide on, and then take actions on. So today we're looking at deliberation and dialogue, at deep listening and holding tensions. And then next week we'll look at convergence, decision making, so making proposals and consent rounds and so on. So basically today is about us getting a sense of what it's like when we engage with fixed opinions, when we debate with each other, when we have a position which seeks to defeat somebody else's position. So it's a kind of either or clash, which is the kind of debate position. And then also experiencing then what's it like to be negotiating, what's it like to move from debate to discussion, to try and find compromise, trade-offs within the existing system. And then what's it like to move deeper than that? What's it like to move into deliberation, into actually identifying each other's deeper needs, taking steps towards transforming the system, addressing root causes? So we're kind of suggesting that there's a movement we want to help people to make. And what we're going to do today is ask you to move into, not now, but move into small groups to look at what's it like to engage in debate very briefly, to have a fixed opinion against somebody else's fixed opinion, and then to move from that to trying to compromise, trying to trade off, trying to see, well, how can you get some of your needs met? How can I get some of my needs met? And then move to deliberation to actually really, well, what is the deeper need that you're expressing? What's the deeper need that I'm expressing? What is it that we actually, what can meet both our needs, not in a compromised way, but in a very real way? And that's the shift. That's the kind of assembly shift through deliberation. And this is all about the culture building that's happened before, during the assembly, where people are feeling like they're actually being listened to, feeling like they're able to listen to each other. So in discussions and debates, obviously people tend to present our particular viewpoints, trying to convince other people that they should think the same as us, and we can polarize. Deliberation involves having the time to really deeply engage with each other, to listen to each other's experience, and to hold tension so that we're able to speak our position, but we want to learn from somebody else's rather than defeat it. So we're able to hold that place of being really curious about why somebody else thinks and feels as they do, and we can hear them being curious about why we think and feel as we do. So that's a kind of contrast between, just move on to the next one. So it's this moving from fixed opinion, one group winning the argument, another losing, to negotiating, which is what we tend to think of as being a better move, because you're at least trying to get a trade-off or a compromise, to really what's the underlying need and why isn't it being met? Why are these underlying needs that seem in conflict? Why can't they both be met? So ensuring people have the support to listen empathically to other people's perspectives, not winning or compromising, but trying to enable action which meets the real needs of different people and non-human beings too. So that involves active listening. So really listening, focusing on understanding what someone's saying, offering summaries, maybe checking your understanding. This is what I think I've heard you say. Asking questions to get clear on what someone's saying. And that's very different to confrontational communication, where people may well ask questions, but it's being asked in order to it's kind of rhetorical question to prove the other person's wrong, to reveal why they're inconsistent and why they're wrong. And it's different to an approach where you're seeing people on your side as always being right, people on the other side as always being wrong. And anybody who doesn't take either side is even more worthy of suspicion than somebody who's an opponent of yours. There's that kind of either or. A confrontational communication is what we're trying to move away from here, towards dialogue where there's enough sympathy, there's a wish to understand the other's point of view, there's a willingness to change your point of view if there's a good reason to do so. So the tension is, how do you hold your own perspective? You're honest about that, you're upfront about that, you share that and share your experience, but you're also profoundly open to the other person's experience and being willing to really hear that they are doing the same for you. So we're going to use an exercise to look at that experience of trying to hold both. I mean, I guess maybe I should give that Kendall example. Would that be good? Just to give it, I mean, to make it slightly more, I don't know, concrete is probably the right word because they used concrete, I think. In Kendall, there was the flooding happening in Kendall, and there was an argument for building kind of walls along the riverbank to try and stop the flooding happening. People were really angry about that, cutting down trees to do that. You know, was going to contribute to, you know, those trees being cut down would be contributing to the climate crisis itself. There's a big clash between people on either side of that. And so you could end up with either not listening to each other, insisting on your point of view. You could end up trying to find a compromise about, well, you cut down some trees and not others. Or you could look for a kind of deeper solution, which might be planting indigenous trees upstream, trying to reforest a deforested landscape, introducing beavers and dams, whatever else. There may be other ways of meeting the needs that actually meet the deeper needs of both people not wanting to be flooded in their homes today, but also people not wanting to create a world where flooding is inevitable tomorrow. So that's just an example of where you might move from that kind of fixed position, both positions being understandable, to compromise, and then actually going, well, let's not just compromise, let's try and solve the underlying problem here.
Stop sharing.
Yeah.
I just want to see whether there was anything else we wanted to say. Yeah, so I mean, not very much. I don't want to say very much more, but it's you know, in terms of an assembly, if we're there are a whole bunch of different kind of skills and tools that we can use. And active listening and this looking for deeper needs are part of what is really helpful when people are not agreeing with one another. There's also the kind of culture building stuff that we've hopefully done before, where we're really kind of trying to create a context where people feel relaxed, where they feel like it's okay to get things wrong, where they feel like, where there's a kind of informal atmosphere. So people aren't there as their professional selves. They're just there as their normal selves, their home selves. So that also allows us often to be more flexible around our points of view. And also this kind of like slowing down that we can do when we're noticing tension or conflict in the group, that we don't kind of bounce off it and try to run away from it. We kind of model being interested in it, seeing it as potentially a really, really useful thing that might take us to somewhere new. And so another technique that we hopefully will have time to dig into with you later today is using problem trees. They're a very, very simple technique for getting everything out on the table, for really kind of quickly and thoroughly exploring an issue, and flushing out whether there are really different points of view about what might be causing it. Yeah, this kind of looking for depth is one of the most important things that we can do in an assembly, because it's very, very different to how we normally do politics. We're normally looking for quick answers, and to just get away with the absolute bare minimum. Oops. Oh no, I thought I dropped, but it looks like I didn't. Chelsea, you've got your hand up.
Hi, did you say problem trees?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes, and we also in Torry we created something slightly on the hoof called a solution tree, which we're also hopefully going to get to today. But let's move on to, well, actually we wanted to start off with the break, because the breakout session we have planned is quite long. So if you want to take a 5-minute break and come back at 9 minutes past, then I'll tell you what we're hoping for you to do in the breakouts. Yeah? And pause recording. Okay, for those of you with your cameras off, I'm going to just have to have my fingers crossed that you're back. Right, so in the breakouts, okay, thank you for the thumbs, that's great. We're going to have breakouts in groups of 3 again, and the activity that we have is in 3 rounds. So for each round, we'd like 2 people to be active participants and 1 person to be observing. And swap round each time so that everyone gets a chance to do each role. And oh, there was one more thing. Oh yeah, for the observer, and to some extent for the active participants, this is sort of light role play. We're pretending that we are participants in an assembly. And so the person who's observing is somebody in assembly who's watching this happening in front of them. And the other 2 people are themselves, then a version of themselves who agrees with whatever it is that they're saying. We've got 4 issues, and we would like you to pick 1 to work with in your group. So when you change your roles round in the different rounds, you're not changing your issue. You're keeping with the same issue. You're just treating it differently. And the 3 different ways that we would like you to treat it is, in the first round, we would like you to do that polarization, take sides, and argue with one another. So each of these situations that we're going to share with you have got a fight or potential fight happening in them. You decide of the active participants who's going to take which side, and you spend about approximately 3 minutes having an argument about this subject. In round, and then take a little bit of time for the observer to feed back what it felt like to listen to you. So this is someone in the assembly listening to 2 people having an argument. For the second round, we'd like you to keep with the same topic. You're going to have slightly different protagonists here because you'll have swapped roles, but you're trying to find a compromise between the 2 sides. So you disagree with one another, but you're trying to find a way to make it work. And then for the third round, still the same issue. You're going to try and look for the deeper needs that are there for each side. So there may be stuff that they're not talking about that is important to them when they're thinking about this issue. And again, see whether that generates new perspectives, and when the observer is reflecting what it felt like as a participant in this make-believe assembly when you heard this topic spoken about in that way. So it is a little bit more complicated than the scenarios that we've done with you before. So is everybody feeling clear about how we're going to go about this? Is there any kind of confusion at this stage? No? Looks like people are pretty clear. That's great. If you also can, at the same time, take notes on the Jamboard partly to remind yourself. They don't have to be excellent notes. They're just things that you're thinking. The first 4 pages are free for you to do that. Yes, the observer just watches and feels what they're feeling, and then feeds back afterwards. So each round, we've kind of scheduled about 6 minutes for each round. So that's for the 2 people having the active conversation, and then for some feedback from the observer. So let's see how that goes, and we come back into the big room and just feedback from each of the groups on how it was, and have a conversation about those different styles of dealing with disagreement.
Eva, do you want the scenarios pasted in? Is that for the next?
Yeah, if you can put those in the chat, then if everyone chooses exactly the same scenario, that's not a problem. And also, if you have something else that you would like to, if somebody comes into the group who's got a scenario they would really like to use to do this with, then feel free to do it with something completely different. So yeah, so we'll see you in about, is it 25 minutes did we give for this, Johanna?
Yes, but it's actually gone in 10 minutes, so might need to
All
record
right.
after
Yeah.
add-on time.
Sorry, Joanna, I dismissed my notice so that I could read the chat. And I didn't manage either, so
Right.
if you could let me go into my group again.
Sure, you should be able to see it when you go in.
How do I find it? Oh, join breakout room, maybe?
Yeah, I can move you.
I found it. Thank you. I got it. Thank you.
Hey, welcome back.
We didn't finish.
Oh no. Sorry. Well, hopefully you can hear from other people how that last how that last one went. I'm interested to know because sometimes it's quite a difficult one to do, although it's very productive when you manage it. But let's hear back from one of the groups on how each of those different sort of phases went. Anyone willing to do a bit of feedback?
Since we really only completed the first round, I think we could feedback about that one. That it took us a while to realize like that we should have been more argumentative, that we were like trying to make arguments for our side, but then we realized like actually if this was really happening, people would be like jumping over each other and passionate and really combative when they were discussing it. So we realized that, and then we did start to do that, and then it was uncomfortable for our observer when we behaved that way.
Right. That's really interesting, and funny how when you're not in the throes of that passion, it's not something that even even occurs to you. But it's so impossible not to do that sometimes when you're feeling really annoyed that someone else doesn't agree with you. And it's so bloody obvious. Okay, someone else from another group? How many do we have? We had 3 groups in the end, or 4. Well, let's have 4. Okay.
I can come in on group 3, and Nick and Jane
Fantastic.
if you want to add anything. So we did very quick of each one, and we didn't get much done of the third one because we had some technical issues at the beginning, so we lost a little bit of time. But with the debate, it was very much just each other, like was it Chelsea? Was just saying it's very much butting heads and each person just restating their own position, and only considering their own needs and not thinking about the needs of other people. And then when we moved into the kind of compromise space, it was very much starting to think about how both of those needs could be met, and kind of looking at alternative solutions potentially and sharing the space. We were looking at the council building a school in the local park. And then just what we're starting to get into on the third one was actually thinking about the needs. So what the park was actually used for, why it was important, why a new school was needed in the first place, and starting to consider the needs of everybody in the community together. And then we kind of ran out of time, so that's about as far as we got.
Okay, but it sounds like quite a good start with that part. How
Yeah,
did
I
it
mean, you
feel
can see
to
the progression between.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's on
you're back,
page
Claudia.
3 of the Jamboard.
Yeah, darling, I'm actually on a call just now.
I was just wondering how it was for the observers in your group. Maybe when you were observer, Barbara, you could talk about that, and then the others could have a quick.
Yeah, so I was observing in the sort of compromise phase. And it was, yeah, it was fine. It was kind of okay. The people are getting along. They're trying to, it was kind of like starting, the person advocating for the park was starting to ask questions about what alternatives there might be for the park and for the school and vice versa. So it was kind of a lot more, oh, well, could we look at doing this for the school? Could we share the park? How would the park users feel about, you know, having a sort of the school playground in the park area, or having the park as the playground sort of thing. So the footprint of the school was reduced. So yeah, it was.
Did you notice a difference in your feeling listening to it? Did you notice like it feeling different, or were you just sort of generally interested, or
just kind of
what was
interested? I think
there?
we took it in turn to be the observer. So yeah. But it was much more. I kind of wanted to jump in and kind of say, oh, what about this? So I was more interested in getting involved, I think, than I would have been if it had just been two people, or if it was two people butting heads, I would have wanted to jump in and try and start that compromise discussion, but it would have been more uncomfortable. But Nick, I think you were the observer for the first one, weren't you? Were you? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, you just notice the the ping pong nature of the conversation. It's like a thrust and parry kind of, and then and I guess it's a bit maybe tense because of that. And as an observer, I suppose you can see that they're not really seeing each other's point of view.
Right. Yeah, that they're just pinging off each other.
Yeah, it's more of a competition who can get the one up on the other one.
Yeah. And Jane, were you the observer in the last part?
She was.
Yeah. Can you hear me? Because I've turned my camera off again. I was the observer, and it seemed that everybody, the whole community, was beginning to be considered needs being met with a lot more consideration. But we only have a very short time to do that.
Right. Yes, you did have a very short time. You were a little bit choppy there, so I didn't get well, you're kind of coming and going. You could always put a note in the chat if you'd like to about more about just how it felt to listen to them when they were in that kind of a mode. Would be good to hear.
It was very positive.
Aha. Yeah, good. Okay, another group with maybe different experience or the same experience. Let's do one. Yeah, please. Yeah, great.
So I'm on a train, so I did all observing, and the other two, sorry, Tim and I've forgotten your name. Lindsay, we did all the sessions. So what was really interesting was that this was a little bit of a sit. So we did the skateboarding one.
Yeah.
So that was a bit of a scenario which I think both of them had been through before. And interestingly, so we went through the sort of three different. They kept sliding quite quickly into doing really good kind of exploring each other's potential and each other's needs and how they could solve it. So it was quite hard. It was quite hard to stay in the conflict or stay in the negotiating. But I think that's partly because it was difficult. It was hard for Lindsay to stay on the opposite side, really. But it was definitely a shift. So I think once you start kind of exploring deeper needs and being reasonable and trying to find ways to kind of think, well, could we do this and what else? And then it's much harder for the other person who's in a more positioned place, which Tim role played really well. It's much harder to stay in that place because it's just you're sort of, the scaffolding around that argument kind of disappears a bit more. But I think it's hard to do as a role play because it it's always more difficult when you're in the middle of something with somebody who's really unreasonable or who holds a really, in some ways the scenarios you put forward are perhaps we all have some empathy with. Maybe the scenarios need to be a little bit more contentious.
Right. Yes. I mean, there's certainly
because perhaps
there are
the solutions were a little obvious, perhaps. So maybe it would be worth saying something more, more contentious. I don't know. But anyway, it was very clear that as we went through sessions, how much more they were listening to each other and building on the sort of on exploring the needs more widely and becoming more open about, well, this is what I really need, or this is what's really underlying that. So talking about being vulnerable or talking about, oh, I might be scared of being around a skate park or those sorts of things. So yeah, it was really interesting to listen to, actually.
Any reflections?
Tim and
I'd be interested to know what Tim and Lindsay think, or what your perspective.
Lindsay thinks she's really, really rubbish at being a grumpy old person who doesn't want a skate park, basically.
Lindsay was basically agreeing with Tim, but trying not to.
One thing that I noticed is that when you start moving, like zooming out in looking at the needs, you generally find that you just totally reframe the question, you kind of move. But what you actually end up doing is reframing the question in a way where you start to see it more in the terms of bigger, more societal problems, and you start looking for solutions that are going to challenge bigger vested interests in society and potentially be impossible to achieve because you just don't have leverage to do those things. And whoever's framing the question, like for example, say the council is suggesting two options, they're not going to give you the other option because they're totally in hock to the people who don't want it. So in a sense, you end up zooming out to the point where you need like a massive coalition across society to get what you need, basically.
That's interesting.
Well, yeah. So you're arriving at the underlying causes in a way, aren't you? The underlying systemic causes that are putting you in this place. The divide and rule kind of colonialism. You're pitching against each other, and then you're looking at the system, and then, as you say, you need to have a much bigger force for change, and that's where for us the different pathways become crucial. That you're not just doing this as a community by yourself, but you're linking with other communities so you can affect that kind of change. But that's great.
It's super healthy. I mean, even if you can't get the solution that you need, at least, for example, in the skate park circumstance, you've got a situation where the old people and the young people recognize that actually they just both want a healthier community and to know and trust each other and to be looking out for each other, but they're being forced to fight over resources. But that's a way better position than just fighting over resources.
Yeah, and there are practical things that you could do with that understanding within your community that are not, necessarily changing the kind of foundations of the situation, but you could have identified that there need to be intergenerational spaces as well as spaces for older people and spaces for younger people, and that might be something that you could address. Lindsay.
Yeah, Tim reminded me that of the very cool project that was in the news a couple of years ago, where they had a nursing home and a nursery on the same site together. And yeah, so we concluded that's what was kind of needed, that and a lot of intergenerational stuff, in order to. So we moved quite far back from the skate park.
Yeah, that's great. Anybody else have reflections that they'd like to share from their rooms? Pam?
Just that it's interesting the number of times people have said, and we saw this too, that it was difficult to stay in an argumentative place, possibly because one, maybe we weren't vested in the issue, but I think it's also because most of us, all of us, are used to working collaboratively in some sense or another. And so, yeah, I think we need to remember that out there in the community, we'll have a whole range of experiences of people coming into the room.
Yeah, well, that's interesting because when I've done this with people in person, they've really jumped into the argumentative, and it's been hard to get them out of it. So it may also be a kind of slight disconnect that we have on Zoom, and it may be the time of day, because it's evening and people may be feeling a bit tired. But yeah, and there is, as you're saying, the kind of our tendency to be peacemakers. JC.
I unfortunately thought that the time we spent setting up the machinery to do the actual work was pretty much took up all the time. So there was almost no time left to do the real thing. I don't really know what to suggest, but I mean, it's something I'd like to do again. I mean, perhaps it might be better to get rid of some of the machinery straight off the bat by actually assigning, you are doing this, you're doing that, here's the topic. But even that's problematic, because you've got to have the time to actually think of some sort of sensible argument to justify whatever. So anyway, I mean, I think it's a great thing to do. I'd like to do it again. But,
you didn't have long enough given
given
the complexity.
through it, and a lot of what we spent time doing was actually discussing the machinery, really. Anyway.
Right.
Well, but that is an assembly for you, isn't it? The amount of effort that goes in behind the scenes to make the actual room hire and helping people to turn up and all the rest of it. So I'm sorry, that's not an excuse, because I totally agree. Clearer instructions and clearer time frame, and better working technology would be great. But it is part of the difficulty. We could always try that next week, actually, with very specific. Anyway, we can see if
possibly. I mean, it sounds as though who's this?
Sorry,
Somebody else.
This is Alex.
Alex,
I
go
was
for
just
it.
going to add. I think what's different in Assembly is that people are often coming with a thing that they really want to be heard on.
Yeah.
You know, that they're really attached to, and that they want that to be heard in a wider forum. Maybe partly because no one's listening. So I think it's slightly different setup than a kind of, can we find a collaborative solution, because there's quite a bit to work through of frustration at not being heard, perhaps, or not being taken seriously, which I think makes the deliberation quite difficult. You know, it makes it trickier in an assembly when you don't have enough time, because people kind of need to work through that and feel heard first.
Yeah, that's.
I don't know. It'd be
that's
interesting to
partly
hear what you guys said.
Yeah, no, that's partly what we want to look at next week, is the groan zone, as we've been calling it, is that kind of period when people are making their statements and needing to be heard and not really listening. There's a whole period of that where people, as you say, just really need to feel heard, and they're not necessarily listening to others at that point. So that's a whole process that needs to be happening in the phase before you move to what we're describing here. We were finding this session quite hard with the next session. There's a lot you kind of want to be covering everything at the same time, which we can't do. So we'll come on to that next week. That the groan zone period where people are having to tolerate listening to people who aren't listening to them, basically, which is that first part. I think that's what you're describing, Alex. Yeah.
But the other element is that one of the things that I mean, this was a really big issue in Tory, was over and over again, people said, people in Tory are really angry and you're not going to get any kind of productive thinking until people have had time to vent, because that's always what happens. And in our experience, it often is that there's such a kind of catalogue of offences against the community in Tory, and most people we met wanted to tell us about all of them before we could really get into any other kind of conversation. And one of the ways that we dealt with that was with the problem tree. We wanted there to be a space where everybody could say how shit it was, but also look at why. And I think we thought we might just try to do a problem tree all together just now. This is not something we've done online before, so it may or may not work, but let's give it a go. Normally you would have a really big sheet of paper with a simple drawing of a tree on it on the wall, and one person would be facilitating and somebody else would be note-taking. Listening to what people are saying, putting it on a post-it, and then putting it where they think it goes on this tree. We've got a tree on page 5 of the Jamboard. And I am proposing to take notes while Justin facilitates. So can you all see that? So everyone got access to that?
Could you put the link in chat? I have no idea where the Jamboard is.
I'm with you.
Yeah, I think Johanna can. Yeah, thank you.
And it's page
5.
Page 5.
If you scroll along, there's a little kind of
arrows at the top.
Yeah, there's arrows at the top that can let you scroll along.
So normally with a problem tree, you'd be asking kind of what are the problems, and placing them either up in the branches if they're kind of feel like they're consequences of others, or place them slightly further down if they feel like they're causes. But basically you're letting everybody vent. So coming back to Alex's point, people will be able to say what the problem is, what's the issues that matters to them. But you're then looking for how they're connected. You're looking to try and really convey the sense that these are not isolated problems, even if one individual is emphasizing one, someone is emphasizing another. You're looking at, okay, so what are the causes of this? So, in Tory, there are, just giving the example from Tory first, the example of life expectancy being 13 years lower than other parts of the city, which kind of shows a level of deprivation in Tory that is if you're living 13 years less, you're in a much worse position than somebody elsewhere in there. So the question then would be, well, why is it 13 years less? And then the answer might be, multiple deprivation, and then why? Because there's no jobs, and why? So you're looking for root causes. You're asking the why questions. So once you've got the range of issues out there, then you're asking the why. But we thought for this exercise just now, so to keep it simple, we just start with that question in the middle of that Jamboard. So more and more folk are having to use food banks to access basic food. What are the causes of that? Why? So if we just try that now, just very briefly, people want to throw out and either can write down why. Why might more people be needing to use food banks? Anybody just throw in a verbal answer if you.
Due to the price of food.
Price of food.
Inflation.
Other household costs like heating and energy and all that stuff.
Yeah. Other household costs.
Low wages.
Okay, so
Greedy corporations.
Sorry, go on, Jasmine.
Greedy corporations.
Lack of public funding and social services.
For public funding and social services. Okay, so just with those, there's been a few there that are kind of allied inflation, other household costs. price of food, low wages, and then there's greedy corporations coming in, the lack of public care basically happening there. So you're moving down to the greedy corps would be lower down, and lack of public would be lower down, and then those. So you're looking at kind of what's the underlying causes, and then what are the manifestations of that. So I mean, that just as a one-off.
Yeah. Are you going to ask the why questions?
Well, yes. So the why. So take the low wages as an example. So why low wages? Why the low wages? Why are there no jobs? What would be an answer to that?
Capitalism.
Capitalism. Yeah. Okay. Good stop there.
I mean,
Sorry,
it's
go on.
the greedy Oh, sorry, JC.
Go first, Barbara, and then back to JC. Yeah.
Would the greedy corporations be a cause of low wages? Is that they feel like they're connected?
Absolutely. And I think JC was suggesting capitalism, which is kind of like a cause of greedy corporations, I'm assuming, JC, in terms of they don't come out of nowhere, they come out of a system that demands them, actually. If it's a profit-driven system, you're supposed to be making as much as you can for your shareholders, therefore that can translate into greedy.
Is there a why underneath that?
Yeah, I just want to ask that. Yeah. Is there a why underneath capitalism? Why capitalism?
Power of finance.
Sorry, say that again?
Well, it's the finance sector essentially dominates the economy, and that is the source of, well, most of the problems of capitalism, in my humble opinion.
So what you tend to find here is people either go for systemic causes, so as JC's done here, capitalism and the finance sector within that, prioritizing profit as being the overriding kind of reality we're supposed to be living within, or they go for human nature. So that's the one to be aware of, is people so they'll say greed, so it's kind of blaming human nature, or they'll say capitalism, they'll look at systemic causes. And it's just important to be aware of that, because certainly from where I sit or stand, as an anthropologist, aware of human nature being so utterly diverse, it's never something that you can kind of pin down, but it's definitely something that we tend to be asked to blame, so that we blame ourselves rather than look at a system that we're up against. I'd suggest that. So it's quite important to be aware of that when you're in assembly. People may well come up with that. And it's one that we found in Torry, wasn't it? Quite an important one to respond to in terms of really being clear about the diverse nature of human nature. It's not one thing, and the way that systems then reshape human nature within.
Human nature is where it's placed right now is a little bit too far down. It's probably being a bit closer up, because like human nature or human responses are responses to systems in which we're operating. So I'd say like greed is a consequence of resource division or ownership over production, things like that. So that's another, if you go below capitalism, and I probably don't want to spend all that time there, but looking at kind of historical systems of colonialism, imperialism, supremacy. But that's not all that
Well, I think it's very useful. I mean, it's really important that you either come down to kind of a sense that domination is happening.
Yeah.
Whether it's whichever of those words you use, that patriarchy, capitalism, colonialism, whatever, but there's domination underlying the problem, or you come down to blaming ourselves. So it's I think it's quite a crucial one to be able to respond to. Sorry, Barbara.
Yeah, I was just going to come in and add, I think I don't disagree, but just to play devil's advocate a little bit, is that at some point it's humans that have created the system that we're operating within. So yes, how we're acting now is a reaction to the current system that we're operating in, but it's us as humans that have actually created that system as well. So there must be some sort of thing there about how that connects.
Absolutely.
But it isn't, okay, because it's not all humans who've had the opportunities to hold power. So again, I think
absolutely,
root causes under capitalism is around colonialism, patriarchy, and white supremacy.
So I think one of the things that Barbara's saying there is it's important to recognize our agency too. So if we just blame a system as driving us, then we don't really have any way out of it. So it's really important to also acknowledge our part in that process, because that also paradoxically means we can do something about it. So I think that's, but there are two kind of contradictory truths at play there. One is us being caused by the system we're in, but the other is we have choice around that to different people to different degrees within different kind of privilege ranges of privilege in that place. But I guess that's like an example of like taking one thing, food banks, and then looking at asking the question why and going down. You can also then look up like what's the consequence of food banks, what's the consequence in the community of people having to use food banks. So you can look up at the branches in that context. I mean, so what are the consequences for people in terms of using food banks? Would you want to throw in?
Low
The
self-esteem.
effects of it. Low self-esteem.
Malnutrition.
Malnutrition.
Feeling shamed.
Being shamed.
Limited choice.
Limited choice.
Lack of independence.
Yeah, lack of independence.
Theft.
Is that theft?
Yep.
Yep, theft. Okay, so that can. So go on.
The dietary needs not being met. So, you know, based on, you know, your health, there might be like even more serious health outcomes because you can't get the type of food that you need.
Yeah. So there's a lot of powerlessness happening in this. Sorry?
I was just saying going up the level from that kind of health aspect and the malnutrition, then you're potentially looking at increased pressure on NHS and health services because more people need that.
Right, so there's powerlessness for the individual and there's a real breakdown on the social fabric in that sense and support services. Yeah. Okay, so I think that's probably enough to to get a sense of how that tree works in terms, and it obviously can, if you're spending a lot more time, which you would do, and you're not just asking about one issue, but you're allowing people to voice all the different issues that match them. That does in some way respond to Alex's point earlier about people being able to come out with what matters to them and then start to see the connections between them, the consequences of them, but also see the kind of systemic drivers of that. I wanted to look at the solution tree. Am I moving too fast? I tend to in life. Anybody else want to say anything more on the problem tree? Can you see how this could be useful? I mean, we've just chosen one issue because we've only got a small amount of time. But can you see how this can work for people to be able to see their issue there, can see it matters, and see how it connects to others, and start to get a sense of the whole picture?
What I like about it is that no matter what the topic is, a lot of the root causes would have a lot of overlap for different issues. Definitely would there be some. So, you know, the more you're able to do that exercise with people, you're easier able to name some of the root causes and have agreement on it.
Yeah. So you get a map of the territory and an agreement, some sense of agreement on that.
Yeah. And I think though, you know, Tim was mentioning how as you get further down systemically, in some ways it feels less and less within your control as a person to tackle capitalism. But at the same time, you often find as you get deeper down, you find increasing agreement between people about what's up. Because it's like with the needs. When you get down to fundamental needs, there's very few people who are going to say, you know, it's not, we don't want everybody to have a good quality of life. We don't want everybody to have enough to eat. So if we can agree on that, we may disagree on how to make sure that everybody gets enough to eat, but it's a different feeling when you're disagreeing on a strategy for getting something rather than you're disagreeing on a kind of basic fundamental. And often when we're first come to a topic, we're actually disagreeing quite high up. We're disagreeing more around strategy because we don't spend a lot of time talking about our basic needs. So for instance, with the skate park, you know, the need for young people to have places where they can hang out together and do stuff together is like, there's few people would say that's not a reasonable need of young people. And likewise with older people, few people would say older people shouldn't feel safe in their communities. And that, those are two of the main issues underlying the idea of a skate park where, older people may be against it. It's not that they don't want a skate park per se, it's that they don't want to feel frightened. And in fact, young people may not necessarily only want a skate park. They really want is a place to hang out. And when that need has been heard and agreed that it's important in this community that they get that need met, it may be that there are other things other than a skate park, if that is particularly problematic for whatever reason, that would also meet that need. So I think the problem tree meets it goes about in a different way, but it comes up with a similar kind of deepening of our understanding and converging of our kind of fundamental sense of what's up.
And the other thing we found was that the leaves, the pink leaves there, fall down and they make the soil from which grows this particular problem. So there's a vicious circle that's going on here. The leaves forming the soil, forming the problem, and it carrying on like that. So it's so what we then looked at was the solutions tree and thinking about what's the soil out of which solutions come. So we were thinking if a community garden or a community fridge.
If you move to page 6, then we've got one.
Sorry, if you go sideways.
Oh, Nick's raised hand.
Sorry, Nick, go for it.
Just a question. I'm thinking that if you actually did this, there'd be a real danger of going down a rabbit hole in the conversation and completely losing track of the actual problem, with people arguing about bigger picture things, about what they perceive to be the real cause of the problem. I mean, and well, how to avoid that?
Well, I think the key thing is that you're mapping it. So you're putting this up on. So you're asking questions, and people are going deeper, but you're not entering into. People can say what they want to say, so it doesn't have to enter into a debate and a dialogue. You're just really noting what people are saying. I mean, that seemed to work well in Torrey. I don't remember. So I can hear what you're saying. You could end up with a ideological, arguments happening between people, but that doesn't seem to be what happens. People seem to put forward what they're saying. It's not being, nothing's refused in this tree. Everything's included.
Yeah, right. I mean, one of the big kind of concerns, I guess, and we didn't, although we were anticipating it cropping up in Torrey, it never did, was people talking about immigration as being a big problem. Because it is one of these kind of hot button topics, and a lot of people have been persuaded that, there's too many immigrants and that's what's causing all our problems. But if you put that onto a problem tree, if you kind of accept that as a possible cause of some of the issues, but you say, why is there immigration? Then you're immediately having a new kind of conversation. So there are ways of even with quite contentious things kind of digging underneath them to try to find more common ground. But yeah, I mean, I think like anything else, it's not a fail-safe tool. And what you've outlined there, it is a possible difficulty. And I think, to just treat it almost like, let's get it all out on the table so we can see it all, so we can see the kind of range of opinions and the breadth and depth of the impacts and the causes of this issue that we're looking at together. And it gives you quite a kind of an unpacked place to start, and it certainly isn't where you would expect to end. This is kind of like relatively early in the process that you would use this, and then you would use the outcomes from it in future exercises.
Is it
So those are two very
partly
different
cathartic?
Sorry?
Is it partly meant to be cathartic? Because I guess there was a group I was in, one of the tactics they seemed to use was if somebody was making a point that seemed to take them off track, they would have this like the park, I can't remember what it was called, basically, and say, let's put that in the park, that for later kind of thing. And it's a bit like, it sounds like you're getting it all out first.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, it in a way, it's a way of creating an entire car park or bike rack, is what the liberals call it. But it's a way of kind of creating a place for all of your issues, and then you're going to pick. You would pick on the strands that feel like they're going to be fruitful for the group to look at.
Yeah, but I felt like you were saying something. So I was thinking of it as a kind of place to bring everything out in the open, and it doesn't have to be contentious. But you were kind of saying, well, no, if it's say racism or immigration, then you can actually ask questions and go deeper with that. So there's a choice there, really. It doesn't have to be an ideological argument, but if the question is why, if you're always asking why, then there's a reason why. So there's a reason why people would try and move from one country to another. I mean, you can. So yeah, you got to make a choice about whether you leave it sitting there as a full picture, or whether you actually go deeper down.
Yeah, and again, I guess the choices that you were making there would be depending on what the theme of your assembly was, and on what you were hoping your outputs were going to be.
So if we could jumping just to the next slide, what's this, number 6?
Page 6. Page 6.
Yeah. This is a kind of solutions tree, which is what we're using in Tori. So again, you're thinking about this. One way of doing this is thinking about the soil. What's the soil? What's the roots? What allows for positive outcomes? What kind of community do you want to live in? What would be a result of that? So that's one way of approaching it. But we thought, given time just now, we would just take the example of a community garden or a community fridge as a kind of a different way of responding to the same food needs, so that the food banks operating in. So it's in that kind of sphere. And I guess the question is then, what are the roots that are needed? What kind of society, what kind of community is needed to be able to make a community garden, and what are the kind of consequences of that? So this is more focusing on the consequences of getting together as a community to create a community garden to be able to provide food. So.
Oh, you're not seeing the solutions tree. Are you got to page 6 and you're not seeing anything, or are you just not finding page 6?
Is this on the Jamboard, yeah?
JC can see it.
It's okay if Pam's found it.
Pam can see it.
Hooray! Oh, that's great. It's normally me making technological mistakes. Always great when somebody else does. Yeah. So the question is, what's kind of some consequences of responding with community garden? What are the kind of what's needed at the roots also to make that? So you could look at either of those. What conditions do you need to be able to provide that kind of response? What kind of consequences do you have of that kind of response as a community?
Are you wanting input from us?
Sorry, yes. I wasn't very clear there. Thanks, JC. Yes. Yeah,
access to land.
So, access to land would be a condition.
People being comfortable to volunteer.
Comfortable to volunteer, yeah.
A management system for the community garden.
Management system. It sounds like somebody's been involved in one of these. I know some of you have. Sorry, Philip.
Well, skills in gardening.
Ridiculous, Jeff. Sorry, skills in gardening, yes.
For the community to know that it exists.
That the community exists, or that the garden exists?
No, that the community garden exists.
Community garden exists, right? Yeah. Yeah.
The people who access the food bank need to be linked into the community garden.
Yes. So outreach in that way.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't put that very well.
No, that's great. Thank you. So land, people, skills. Chelsea, sorry.
You need practical things like tools and seeds and structure.
Yeah. Tools, seeds, structures. Okay, and then should we look at the effects? What kind of effects do you think this might have? Remember that we're looking at the effects of the food bank use, what do you think might be some effects of the community garden use, or the fact that it exists?
Empowerment.
Empowerment.
Vegetables.
Vegetables.
Free food.
Free food.
Healthy food.
Healthy food.
Community building bridges between different sectors, people who need food,
Building.
people who are growing it.
Right.
Bridges
between those growing and those needing. Chelsea.
Sense of community.
Sense of community.
Risk of food waste.
Risk of food waste.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Potluck meals.
Potluck meals. Trying to deal with the food waste there.
Alliances with other organizations, other gardeners.
Oh yeah. Okay.
A spin-off is that people need to feel confident that they're able to cook the food that's produced.
Wow. Confident to cook.
Cooking workshops.
Cooking workshop, and also with the cost of living crisis, to be able to have the power in their house to cook the food.
Right.
Reduced social isolation and increased mental and physical health from the exercise and social ability and empowerment people would feel.
Less isolation, health, mental and emotional, physical health.
Could it cause conflicts? I mean, over the land use of things like that. I'm just trying to be negative.
Yeah, go for it, please. Cause conflicts.
Friendship.
Cut down a tree in my community garden whilst I was busy planting potatoes. So yeah.
Oh wow. Okay. Yes, I mean this is human beings for you, isn't it? We're always dealing with ourselves as humans with a whole diversity of needs and so on. So I mean that's great because we were both looking at the kind of positives that are needed, the conditions that are needed, and the positive consequences, but also then starting to move into or actually right the way through the whole need for skills, for management systems, conflict over land, and that conflict that Sarah was mentioning there. So, but I think you can see from that the kind of how a solutions tree can be a useful way of then responding to the problem tree, especially around a particular issue. So we're focusing much more on the park and saving the park in Torry, weren't we? But it's like you're likely to come and focus in on something, and that's a way of really again bringing out the complexity of the issues and the possibilities from which then you can get people may move into the groups that we're going to look at next week in terms of actually people deciding to take action in particular ways and then how to connect them. But it's had quite a lot of connecting up of different areas in this. Some bugger cut down my tree. I didn't quite hear that, but okay, that's actually interesting.
I was summarizing.
Summarizing, right? Okay.
I know, it's succinct.
Any other observations on either or both of those? No? Fine. Oh, yeah, Sarah, you got a hand up.
I really like it because oftentimes I use the problem tree, and in my workshops, maybe it's more introduced as a concept, and we don't have time to kind of go through it. But I love the fact that you could move it onto a solutions tree, because I have a problem fish and the 5 whys, but using the solutions tree, I think is, it's a good next stage for sure.
Yeah, and we generated a lot very quickly, and I think one of the things about these is that it's something you can all do together. Which and it's enriched by having lots of different orientations adding into it. Jay.
I'm not quite sure how to express this, but I just wondered with the problem tree whether getting into, let's say, human nature and people accepting that in each of us there are all these conflicting qualities, so that if we're, on the one hand, if we're complaining about greedy corporations, but also recognizing that we ourselves are greedy, is that a useful place to go, or is that too complicated?
I think it's incredibly useful. I think it's true, so it's incredibly useful. I think it's difficult. It's much easier to say those corporations are awful and that's it, but to then be able to own up to the fact that they have ways of being able to purchase us, as it were, and therefore we need to be able to be wary around that. I think it's really crucial to include that. The decolonization we need of ourselves, not just decolonization of the whole system. So acknowledging that we're part of the problem as well as part of the solution feels. I think that comes back to what Barbara was saying earlier. Kind of seeing ourselves as part of the problem is also liberating. Like, oh well, we can shift ourselves, we can change. And if you're experiencing politics differently in an assembly and meeting differently and decision making differently, then you can see the real possibility of change rather than just sloganing it. So it's experiencing it, I think.
Yeah, it feels like the brain engaged for the last time this evening. Come on. No, it's really gone. Shit, sorry.
Can I say that I think with the, understanding that where greed comes from, or what might be perceived as greed by someone else might be a legitimate reason for someone else. And I think that the root causes then allow you to discuss that a little bit more, because it gives more context or opportunity to give context.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And it goes down to the needs, which I think are so important. One of the best ways I've come across to navigate sort of quite intense disagreements is using this idea of needs, and that when you get down to people's like real needs, they're uncontroversial. Right, so you can have a really controversial issue, but once you get down to why people might be thinking this is a good idea or thinking it's a bad idea, really from their kind of core needs as a human, then it's really, really understandable. It may be a bad way of getting those needs met, or a messy way, or a way that really doesn't work for other people. But these kind of uncontroversial needs are really important to hang on to. So like, even people who are moaning about immigration have are expressing needs for safety, or expressing needs for a feeling of community that they feel safe in, or that they feel familiar with. That is perfectly reasonable. Then thinking that, other people from elsewhere can't be part of that communities, that's problematic. But just that need for community is something that anybody can relate to. And the thing that I wanted to say that I forgot was about the fact that if we're talking about, if we're kind of unpacking that kind of greed and the fact that, or whatever the negative kind of human element is that we can acknowledge in ourselves as well as see out in the world. When we're in an assembly, what we're talking about is making decisions, is about how we want to do things together. And that gives us a choice. And being good is always a choice, being a good person, because we all have negative motivations as well as positive ones. Stuff that makes us a good person is that we choose positive ones broadly. And as communities, we can be, if we have that agency to choose, we can choose to make decisions to do pro-social things rather than to do antisocial things. So we're so used to our politics being antisocial, but there is a choice in all of that.
Right, lots of dodgy issues there that you brought up. That's great. I like that. I feel like a few triggers happening there in me anyway, but that's great. So I'm going to come back next week for decision making, for convergence and decision making, and forming proposals, consent rounds, just like identifying what areas are too contentious actually to be able to act on, or how to shift them, how to adapt to them, or let them go. So this is like next week is looking at decision making and pathways out in terms of actually taking the action in that way.
Yeah. And hopefully we will be able to be human beings rather than a big blue orb.
So it's goodbye from the big blue orb, is that right? Okay. Thanks, everybody. That was really, really
Next
great.
week is the
Great.
penultimate session.
Yeah. Great.
Yeah. You've nearly made it all the way through.
Yeah, congratulations. Wow. Yeah.
See you soon.
Great.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Blue Orb.
Ta-ta.
Ciao.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.